corsage for my princess. Ah, it looks beautiful.
It's never too early to talk with your kids about the dangers of alcohol, but it can be too late. Start the conversation. Stop underage drinking. TalkItOutNC.org.
Talking a little Carolina football schedule today. Thanks for being with us. I'm Jones Angell alongside Lee Pace. Lee, our sideline reporter on the Tar Heel Sports Network, been covering Carolina football for more than 2 decades. And Lee, the schedule comes out today for 2015 Carolina football. Challenging schedule. What jumps out to you as you take a look at the 12 matchups for the Tar Heels?
Well, a couple things, Jones. Number one, first time since 1990 that Carolina is playing 4 straight non-conference games to get them out of the way early. 1990, Carolina played South Carolina, Miami of Ohio, Kentucky, and UConn. This year, the Tar Heels will play South Carolina again, North Carolina A&T, Illinois, and Delaware. So get those out of the way and then get in the non-conference. A couple years ago, Carolina had a very front-loaded schedule. Miami, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, a number of really tough games early in the year, jumped off to 1-5 start, rallied at the end of the year. And then last year, that murderous row in the middle of the year, 5 road games out of 7, going all the way from East Carolina to Notre Dame to Miami. Very difficult schedule, 2-5 over that. If you look at this year's schedule, backloaded, a very, very tough November with Duke, Miami, and then at Virginia Tech and at NC State to wind up the year.
Yeah, boy, those last 2 games, both being on the road, will be challenging. Lee, you mentioned the 4 non-conference games for the Tar Heels, highlighted by that matchup with South Carolina in Charlotte, but all 4 of those games have a Tar Heel tie to them.
They do, and all are interesting in some respect. Of course, the big South Carolina game in Charlotte, a matchup that has been tried to happen for almost 2 decades, and they just haven't been able to work it out. But that's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of kind of turmoil in Steve Spurrier's program right there with 6-6 and talk of some coaching changes. Spurrier himself saying not sure how much longer he wants to coach, so there'll be some overdraft hanging into that game. North Carolina A&T, Rod Broadway, All-ACC Tar Heel linebacker from '77, comes back to Kenan Stadium. He was on John Bunting's staff for 2 years, 2001, 2002. Then Illinois with Tim Beckham in his 4th year. He and Larry Fedora are very close. Beckham was the defensive coordinator, Fedora the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State a few years back, so they've got that tie. And then Dave Brock is in his 4th year at Delaware. He was on John Bunting's staff as receivers coach for 2 years. He brings the Delaware Blue Hens back to Chapel Hill, so that'll be interesting to see how those 4 games work out. Also, all 4 of those teams, Carolina, South Carolina, Delaware, and Illinois, all 6-6 in the regular season last year. So all 4 of those teams are trying to make a break for a good solid 1-loss record.
Coach Broadway's done a really good job with North Carolina A&T. That should be an interesting matchup, as Lee alluded to. Lee, Wake Forest on the schedule. Of course, the ACC rotates with the team that you play on the other side of the division. Carolina's going to play State every year, but it's Wake this year, and that's interesting specifically because the Tar Heels and Wake, of course, just signed that newsworthy non-conference home-and-home that will occur in 2019 and 2021. Now, this matchup next year does count in the ACC, but interesting to see the Demon Deacons and Carolina and the Deacs should play more often.
Well, the way it was set up, Jones, Carolina, and Wake Forest would play only 2 times roughly every decade. And credit to Larry Gallo of the senior administrative staff here in the athletic department at Carolina. He first floated this idea several years back, and I thought it was a terrific idea then, and I was delighted this week to see they had been able to work that out. It just makes a lot of sense. So now Carolina and Wake Forest will at least play 4 times every 10 years, so that's good to see. But Carolina does have the Deacons in Kenan Stadium this year.
Carolina, not a ton of travel next year for the Tar Heels. The longest trips will be to Pittsburgh and to Georgia Tech. Even some of the road games in the neutral site game in Charlotte are close to Chapel Hill, so a ton of opportunities to see the Tar Heels coming up in 2015. Of course, we want you in Kenan Stadium for those 7 Saturdays coming up next year. Thanks for joining us here on GoHeels.com.